This happened last Halloween in my hometown of Willow Creek, a small place where everyone knows each other. I was 23 at the time and never really cared much for Halloween. I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that supernatural stuff. So when my friend Jake dared me to spend the night at Old Granger's place, I didn't think twice about it. Old Granger's place is this creepy, abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. There's been a lot of rumors about it over the years. The story goes that Mr. Granger, who used to live there in the 80s, went insane and murdered his whole family before disappearing. Some say he still haunts the place. Most people in town avoid it, but I never believed in any of that. Jake offered me $200 to spend the night there alone, and since I figured it was easy money, I took the bet. I headed out there just before sunset. The house is pretty isolated, surrounded by woods, and the driveway is overgrown with weeds. When I pulled up, the place looked even worse than I remembered. Windows were broken. The front door was hanging off its hinges, and the whole house just had this decaying, eerie vibe to it. I walked up to the front door and pushed it open. The wood creaked as if it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the place was trash dust covered everything, and the air was stale, like no one had breathed it in decades. I found a spot in the living room to set up for the night, laying my sleeping bag on the floor. Around midnight, things started to get weird. I was sitting there in the dark when I heard something from upstairs. It was faint at first, like a light tapping, but it grew louder. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate. I froze, listening as they moved from one end of the house to the other, right above me. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped and the house fell silent again. I sat there, clutching my flashlight, waiting for something else to happen. Just when I thought it was over, I heard a loud thud from upstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen or been dragged across the floor. I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and started making my way up the old wooden staircase, which creaked with every step. The air felt heavier up there, like it was harder to breathe. When I reached the top, I noticed that all the doors in the hallway were closed, except for one. The master bedroom door was cracked open, just enough for me to see inside. I walked toward it, my flashlight shaking in my hand. When I peeked through the doorway, I saw the bed inside. It was old and rotting, but something was lying on top of it. A lump like someone was under the sheets. My heart started racing because I knew there was no way anyone else was supposed to be in the house. As I stood there staring, I noticed something terrifying. From underneath the sheet, a hand was hanging off the side of the bed. It was pale, shriveled, and motionless. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of prank, but before I could do anything, the hand twitched. Then, slowly, the sheet started to rise, like someone or something underneath was sitting up. I didn't wait to see what it was. I bolted, running back down the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't even bother grabbing my stuff. As I hit the bottom of the stairs, I heard footsteps thundering behind me, like someone was chasing me. But I didn't dare look back. I ran out the front door and straight to my car. I could still hear the footsteps, but once I slammed the car door and sped off, the house fell silent again. I drove back to Jake's place, shaking and out of breath. I didn't say a word, but he knew from the look on my face that I wasn't joking. I never went back to Old Granger's place after that night, and I'll never take another dare like that again. This happened to me about 5 years ago on Halloween night. I was 19 at the time and living at home with my parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Every Halloween, I'd help my parents hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. But that year, I had plans with some friends to go to a Halloween party later in the night. I wasn't super excited about the party, so I decided to stay home a little longer and help my mom with the candy. It was a typical Halloween evening. Kids in costumes were running up and down the street. and there was the usual crowd of families walking from house to house. My parents' house was always one of the more decorated ones, on the block lots of fake spider webs, carved pumpkins, and even a couple of animatronics in the yard. It was fun, but nothing too scary. Around 9 o'clock, things started winding down. The flow of trick-or-treaters slowed to a trickle, and most of the kids on the street had gone home. My mom went to bed, and I was left alone to finish handing out the last bit of candy before heading out. That's when it happened. I was sitting by the front door, checking my phone when I heard a knock. It wasn't the typical rapid knock from excited kids. This one was slow, deliberate, and kind of off. I figured it was some older teens pulling a prank or looking for extra candy. I opened the door, expecting to see a group of kids in costumes, but instead, there was just one person standing there. He was tall, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing an old, torn-up clown costume. His face was painted white with streaks of black around his eyes, but what really got me was his smile. It was this wide, unnatural grin, like he was forcing it way too hard. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me, that creepy smile never fading. Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I was already getting a weird feeling. The guy slowly reached into the bowl, never breaking eye contact with me, and took a single piece of candy. He held it up to his face like he was inspecting it, then dropped it into his pocket without a word. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I tried to close the door, but before I could, he suddenly spoke. "Nice decorations," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Very lifelike." That's when I noticed his eyes dart toward the yard where we had the Halloween props set up, the fake zombie and skeleton my dad had put together earlier in the week. I forced a smile and nodded, trying to stay polite. "Thanks. Happy Halloween." He didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his smile getting even wider. I was about to say something else when, out of nowhere, he whispered, "You'll see." For the next few minutes, I stood by the window, peeking through the blinds to see if he was still out there. I saw him standing in the yard, right by the Halloween props, just staring at the house. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just some guy trying to mess with people on Halloween. But things got weirder. Later that night, after I'd left for the party, my parents woke up to strange noises coming from outside. My dad went to check it out and found that our Halloween props had been moved. The fake zombie was now lying on the front steps, and the skeleton had been propped up against the door, positioned like it was trying to break in. At first, they thought it was a prank by some neighborhood kids, but then my mom noticed something even more disturbing. There was a piece of candy, a single piece sitting on the porch. It was the same kind of candy I had given that guy earlier. We never saw him again after that night, but every Halloween since, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting. Moving to Columbus felt like a fresh start. At 27, I was ready to put down roots, and the little house at the end of Grove Street was perfect, old, charming, and affordable. I didn't mind that it creaked or that the windows rattled. I liked that it had history, something I could feel. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet. I fell into a routine work during the day, unwinding at night. But then, I noticed things. It started with my front door. No matter how many times I locked it, it was always open in the morning. I brushed it off as forgetfulness until it happened 3 mornings in a row. Then there were the footsteps. Soft, shuffling sounds echoing through the house around 3 in the morning. Each time, I'd get up and check, but there was never anyone there. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. The real unsettling part, though, was my neighbor. He was an older man, always in the same ratty brown jacket, watching me from across the street. At first, I thought he was friendly, waving when I came home. but it quickly became clear that he was anything but. One evening, he approached me as I was unloading groceries. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough, as if he'd just woken up. "You should come over for a drink sometime. It gets lonely out here." I felt a chill run down my spine. I politely declined, but he lingered, his eyes unsettlingly focused on me. I brushed off the encounter, telling myself I was being paranoid. That night, as I settled into my routine, there was a knock at the door. It was too late for visitors. I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. Just a folded piece of paper on my porch. I picked it up, my heart racing. It read, "Come over now." I looked across the street. His porch light was on, and the door stood ajar. I shut the door and locked it, panic rising in my chest. On Halloween night, the neighborhood was alive with laughter and costumes, but I felt the dread creeping back. I decided to stay in and ignore the world. As the clock struck 10, I got a text from an unknown number. "Still waiting. You should have come over." The next morning, I packed my car, determined to leave Grove Street behind. As I loaded my things, the man called out from his porch, "Leaving so soon? You never came over." His voice dripped with something unsettling. I drove off without looking back, but later that night, my phone buzzed with a picture message. My heart dropped as I opened it. It was a photo of my old house, dark and quiet, with the man standing on my porch, grinning eerily, holding my house key. I had hoped to escape, but it felt like I was still trapped.